The demo I'm going to show you is of bike and pedestrian activity in Houston, Texas. And before getting into the platform, I'm going to start off, Haley, if you don't mind, next slide, with this side-by-side comparison of Houston's bike plan network and Streetlight's active transportation snapshot for the same area. So the figure on the left is the city's bike plan network showing existing cycling infrastructure, and the color coding is such that the green is showing existing off-street cycling facilities, the blue is showing dedicated on-street cycling facilities, and the purple is showing shared on-street infrastructure. And then turning our attention to the right, this figure is showing existing cycling ridership in 2024 in the same area displayed through Streetlight's active transportation snapshot. So this side by side shows us exactly what we'd expect to see. The trail network, the separated trail network that's shown in green on the left is showing up in yellow and bright green on the right, which indicates the highest category of annual average bike trips. So that's upwards of 500 trips a day in green and over 1,000 trips a day in yellow. And the dedicated on-street cycling infrastructure, which is shown in blue on the left, is mostly showing up in blue and turquoise on the right, indicating between 100 and 500 annual average bike trips a day. And then the shared on-street facilities, which are showing up in light blue and dark blue, on the left, on the right, indicating between 0 and 100 bike trips a day. So it shows much lower ridership on those on-street facilities. And the quick side-by-side comparison is a great way to get a snapshot of ridership across your region and to understand which facilities are actually being utilized by cyclists. And based on this comparison, this reinforces the sort of well-understood concept that cyclists are much more likely to cycle on infrastructure where they're separated from vehicles and where they feel safer. So this is a great way also to identify gaps in your existing network. And while the Streetlight active transportation snapshot on the right is showing high ridership, especially on the trail network along the river, lots of ridership downtown, we can definitely see some gaps in connectivity, in particular between those trail networks. When it comes to project prioritization, the active transportation snapshot can be used to evaluate proposed projects and inform existing ridership or pedestrian activity at different locations to determine where the active transportation investment might be the most impactful. So this next slide has a similar figure. So this is still the Houston City Bike Plan Network, but this time instead of looking at existing infrastructure, we're looking at proposed infrastructure. And the red arrows are identifying or pointing to two separate proposed east-west connections across downtown Houston. So the one on the kind of north end is along two separate roads, so Rusk Street and Capitol Street. They're each one-way roads. And at the south end of downtown, the arrow is pointing to another two separate one-way corridors that would run along Bell Street and Leland Street. So now I'm going to jump into our active transportation snapshot and to explore existing cyclist volumes in downtown Houston and walk us through how we would use the snapshot to help decide which east-west connection would likely be the most impactful and should maybe be prioritized first for funding. So just to orient us here, we're looking at the active transportation snapshots. We saw that earlier in that screenshot on the right, and we can still see that the yellow up here indicating that really high ridership along the river. And downtown, we see lots of bright segments as well. So I'm going to zoom in down here, and we're going to look at the existing ridership on those proposed east-west corridors. So let's give that a second to load here. And looking at the two roads on the north end of downtown, we can see Capitol Street here and Rusk Street here. And they're showing up kind of in that turquoise color around this area. And I'll zoom out a little bit, and you can see down here is that south connection. So Leland Street is showing up in light blue, and Bell Street as well showing up in that light blue. So right away, we can see based on the color coding alone that the ridership is a little bit higher on the northern connections, so the Capitol and Rusk Street compared to Bell and Leland. Something else that stands out in this area is Lamar Street is showing up in that bright green color, indicating that Lamar Street is a well-utilized east-west connection for cyclists in this area. And if I click on a section of Lamar Street here, we'll get a pop-up window that gives us a bit more information, including the average annual daily bike trip number, which we can see here is 181. So about 181 trips a day. traveling east-west on Lamar Street. And then if we look at the two proposed corridors, starting up at Capitol Street up here, I'm going to click on the segment of Capitol Street and we can see the actual numbers here. So we can see that there's 83 bikes a day traveling eastbound on Capitol Street. And then Rusk Street is seeing about 100 bikes a day traveling westbound. And when we compare that to Lamar Street, which is seeing just under 200 bi-directional bike trips, that's a pretty similar corridor with nearly 100 bikes traveling in each direction along Rusk and Capitol. And then if we move down to that proposed connection on the south end of downtown on Bell and Leland Street, I'll start by selecting a segment of Bell. We can see there's approximately 28 trips a day traveling eastbound on Bell. And then on Leland Street, approximately 28 trips as well traveling westbound. So it makes sense, of course, to invest in cycling infrastructure or improvements where the ridership already exists. And based on these current volumes, prioritizing the Rusk and Capitol bike infrastructure would probably be a good idea. And then also just zooming out and looking at kind of the big picture based on the connectivity of all across downtown and Lamar Street being a really great east-west connector that's sort of already on the south end. And we can see that cyclists are able to use the bike path to get all the way up to the north end of downtown. Having another connection for a bit further north probably makes sense from that standpoint as well. And now I'm going to shift over to look at the pedestrian snapshot instead of the cyclist snapshot. Right away, we can see things look a little bit different. We're still seeing a lot of pedestrian activity right downtown. The pathways are lighting up much less. So while there is still some pedestrian activity on the river path, there's a lot less compared to the cycling. And if I zoom out a little bit, we can see some other things happening in the area. So we can see some pretty bright areas near the universities where there's lots of pedestrian activity. This area right kind of in the middle is the Houston Zoo. So lots of pedestrian activity there. I'm going to zoom out a little bit more and we can see the airport lights up really bright north of the city. So there's lots of pedestrian trips near the airport and lots of different regions that are lighting up more than others, indicating more pedestrian activity. I'm going to zoom in over here to this commercial area that's lighting up a fair bit with really high average annual pedestrian trip activity. And this region is home to a mall. So there's a big mall in the kind of southwest corner of this intersection. There's another mall in the northeast corner. And there are also a number of big hotels in this area. So there's lots going on down here, lots of pedestrian activity. And then just a little bit further east along Westheimer Road, there's a shopping district called the River Oaks Shopping District with lots of storefronts that can be accessed on foot. So lots of businesses here. And we're going to focus on this more pedestrian, more of a shopping district than the mall, this River Oaks area. And I'm going to click on along Westheimer here. I'm going to click on one of the segments that looks like it has the most pedestrian activity. So opening up that window again, we can see on this section of Westheimer, there's approximately just over 2,100 average annual pedestrian trips a day. And another really great feature here is that we can click Street View, and then with one button, we can open up the Google Maps Street View for that road segment. It takes us automatically over to Google Maps, and we can see what the conditions are in this area. So in this case, we can see this shopping area has a lot of storefronts, a lot of shops that can be accessed on foot. It looks like there's a fair bit of parking here as well. And while there are basic sidewalks on each side of the road, it's still 6 vehicle lanes here, and the region is definitely very vehicle focused. So understanding how many pedestrians are traveling through here every day, even if they're just walking from their parking spot to a shop further up the road, that can be really helpful information for the city.